Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell, and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Last week, if you remember, we heard from Tom, who lives in a rural cottage, and he was unfortunate enough to be almost lured out of his property by the cries of a lady in distress, only to find 8 to 12 hellish-looking creatures that were sniffing around his garden. I spoke to Tom again yesterday, and we went over some of his other reports that he's had. And he's quite poorly. He's going into hospital this week for an operation. So we've decided between us that he'll use his recuperation time to update me on all of his encounters. And then I'll share them with you when he's ready and he feels that he's got everything out that he wants to get out. His main reason is to share his experience for prosperity and explain to people how you do make mistakes with the paranormal, and to talk about things like protection when you're going into an area or a haunted home. So if you listen to the end, you'll hear an update, and I'll share some of the reports with you that you'll be hearing that have come in after Tom made his report. One is from a former police officer who's named Dave Wilson, and he said, "Hi Deb, back in the summer of 1982, I was a Thames Valley Police Officer, and myself and a colleague were on a night shift that lasted from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. We were patrolling in Hotel 24, in which at the time was a police-issued Ford Escort. We found ourselves at the Shotover area of Oxfordshire, which back then was all open fields and woodland. When we got near Cowley, we decided to pull over for a cigarette break. I'd say it was approximately 3 a.m. in the morning. We packed up, moved to the front of the vehicle, and proceeded to light up a cigarette. It was a warm night, clear sky, no one around. We were very quiet. We were just generally chatting between ourselves, when all of a sudden, this thing came out of nowhere, from the wooded area on our left, and it came onto the lane ahead of us. And it was standing maybe 30 yards from our position. At first, I thought it was a really tall person, but soon I realised it was far too tall to be any man. We both estimated it to be approximately 7 to 8 feet tall. With the strong moon and clear skies, we both could see it was no person. It was covered in fur. It had a long snout with very long ears, and it appeared to have no tail. But I remember that it had massive shoulders. It was obviously startled by our presence, and it turned its head to look at us. And when it did that, it was easy to see that it had very large eyes that sort of shone in some way. At that point, I felt that we could both be in serious trouble. However, it didn't come in our direction. It bounded across the road in front of us, moving on 2 legs into the forested area on our right, and was gone. We were both physically shaking, but being police officers, we just automatically did a scan of the ground. We didn't find any footprints, but I think we found something else. Somehow, we both got back in our car, and after a long discussion, we decided never to speak about what had just happened to anyone but each other. I'm still having recurring nightmares about this event, even after all this time has lapsed, but I just don't know what we saw that night. We searched the ground. We actually found a hair sample, which I have kept in a container all these years. In addition, I've spoken with my colleague who was with me at the time, and he's willing to corroborate my report. He added something I'd forgotten. When we saw it, and it turned and looked at us, and I do remember this, he sort of smiled, as if its mouth changed, as it gestured at us. He also said that he wants to put this experience to bed. He just wants to give me the evidence find and the account and have no more to do with it. And I understand that a lot of witnesses feel the same way. And I felt the same way for very, very, very many years afterwards. It's unique to each of us, and we have to respect his decision because that's what he wants to do, and I think that's very courageous of him. Now, One of the earliest reports to be made was in Derbyshire, and that happened in the Victorian ages when a number of people in the area reported a wild man. But that's Derbyshire. Where Dave had his experience, less than about 5 miles away, there is a report from a gentleman known as Nick Hayes, and I spoke to him myself several years ago now. And he had quite a frightening experience walking between two wooded embankments in the Oxfordshire area. Nick has his own website and it's called Quest for the Invisible. He has several UFO experiences. But this is his experience in Oxfordshire, in his own words. And Nick said, I was living in the area at the time, Deb, and myself and my then partner would often visit the woods at night. We used to go down there all the time, late at night together, and we'd often saw orbs of lights moving above the river, as well as through the wooded area, although we never experienced anything as scary as my encounter that evening when I was walking down to Cowley for band practice. It was 1997, and I'm still trying to come to terms with this to this day. I experienced something that still puzzles me. I was running a bit late for band practice at my mate's house down in Cowley, Oxfordshire. The journey involved getting a bus down to the bottom of Cowley Road and then walking quite a distance to his house. It's for roughly about 40-minute journey. I'd sometimes walk down the nature reserve called the Lye Valley. It's a nice walk during the daytime. I'd get to my mate's house in about 25 minutes and save the bus fare and get in a walk. That's what I did. The walk this night was along a small track that went downhill quite gradually, and eventually a steep bank appears on both sides of you as you walk deeper into the valley. The banks going up each side were quite steep and full of trees and brush. This particular night, it was already getting dark. We decided to take the shortcut anyway, as the actual Lye Valley walk's about 15 or 20 minutes long, and then you get up onto the golf course and head down Marsh Road, where my mate lived at the time. It was about 10 minutes into the walk. It was quite dark. Couldn't see very much, as the trees were on either side of me at this point, and they were kind of blocking out what little light there was left in the sky. I suddenly became aware of something to my left, about 20 feet away from me, and it was walking parallel with me, perhaps halfway up the bank amongst the trees. I instantly got that fear, and a feeling of dread washed over me. I suddenly stopped, and whatever it was did an extra crunch as it took another step, and then it too was still. I started walking faster, and so did this thing. It was stalking me, so I stopped suddenly again, and again this thing did a few more steps, as I think it didn't realise I'd stopped, as I'd stopped so suddenly, trying to catch it out. I picked up the pace, and I stopped one more time all of a sudden, and this thing did another few steps, and then it snarled. It reminded me of a programme I saw on the Beast of Bray Road, and the other wolf dog-like creatures that people had come into contact with in the US, where they repeatedly mention a snarling sound to go with that reenactment, of the experience. It sounded just like that, Deb. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I got an instant fight or flight feeling, as I could tell it was slightly in front of me, and the track it was on met the track I was on, just around the corner in the direction I was heading, where the walk met the golf course. It was a really out of the way area. No one was around, and I knew that something bad would probably happen if I carried on walking towards the golf course. I turned around, ran as fast as I could back to Wood Farm and the safety of the built-up area. I didn't see the thing stalking me as it was dark, but even when a few of the distant street lights above the valley lit up some of the trees, I couldn't see anything either. But it was definitely sounded bipedal, and the growl it made when it realised I'd worked out it was stalking me was blood-curdling, and it freaked me out big time, more than anything I have ever experienced. I haven't dared go back there since, and that was about 15 years ago. I'd told a few mates, but I haven't told anyone else really. The whole experience really scared me, and to be quite honest, I wouldn't dare go down there at night by myself at all. Just thinking of it makes me a bit on edge. And my body reacts to the fear that even, after all these years, it would be great to hear of someone else who had a similar incident down there in the Lye Valley. Well, they both mention Cowley, don't they? Which seems to be central to the police officer's report and Nick's report, which makes perfect sense. We often hear of creatures being seen around golf courses, for as strange as that may seem, but they're empty at night, there's no people on them, and that grass is cut continuously, and the deer and the rabbits love it. And I think that's possibly why golf courses play into cryptid reports. But they're not the only police officers that saw something strange and reported it in the UK. One of the BBR members passed on a report to me from a conversation that he'd had with his boss. And his boss was a serving officer for Yorkshire Police at the time. And he explained that there'd been an incident that had happened one evening and they had to wait at a crime scene until other units arrived. The scene was a death, an unexplained death, and the body showed signs of predation. And whilst at the scene, a female officer saw a strange creature in the woodland. The potential crime scene was in fact the body of a man who was found half eaten in his tent. He'd been missing a few years and living rough apparently, and it was assumed to be a natural predation. He said that on the night the officers were spread around the scene, when another PC started screaming, he said she sounded like a banshee. And he ran to help her out. And it was a female police officer who was nearest to the tent covering the man's body. And she explained that she turned around in the dark and she saw a shape of something right behind her. She said she caught a glimpse of its eyes and it was up to her stomach or chest height. But by the time she got her torch out and her wits about her, the creature had run off. She didn't say anything about whether it ran off on 2 legs or 4 legs, so I'm unsure, what kind of creature she saw. There are other reports in the area, though, but there are also other reports of, say, a large cat and things like that. But there's one report that stands out that is very, very close as the crow flies. In fact, there are two. One is a Walker's Farm incident where 2 girls were chased from the property by what they described as animalistic creatures that were down on all fours. They chased the girls until the girls were out of the boundary and the figure stopped and they didn't move on anymore. And then we had a researcher called Karen Charlton, and her daughter saw a large black muscular creature in 2010. And she said, my daughter and her boyfriend were out one night talking. My daughter was outside the car and he was looking into the field behind her. And they were parked on Nethermore Road, chatting when her boyfriend told her to get back in the car quickly. And then they both saw a large black muscular creature weaving all over the fields as it was chasing a rabbit. It was down on all fours at all times and was just moving fluidly and quickly chasing its prey. They got home, were really shaken up, and they didn't know if it was a big cat or something else. Now, as I say, there has been a big cat seen in the area, several big cats, in fact, and also a gentleman who saw what he described as a thickly muscled humanoid creature that was green in colour, and that happened in September of 2021. So the area seems to be rather strange itself. But let's go back and look at a set of police officers in Berkshire who saw an enormous wolf-like beast. Former Berkshire policeman Brian Langston shared a story in November 2000 about 2 Windsor police officers named PC Tom Walters and PC Lucy Palmer, who were on patrol in the early hours of the morning when they encountered a strange wolf-like creature. The officers are said to have encountered the enormous wolf-like beast in their headlights in the car park of Windsor Leisure Pool in Stovall Road. The beast is said to have escaped towards a river. PC Palmer is quoted as saying, "It looked too big to be a normal dog. and it seemed irritated that we'd disturbed it. It had an odd gait, and it walked towards the river, and then it vanished. Now, less than a mile away, another report of a mystery beast has been spotted near the river at Bolter's Lock in Maidenhead in 1990. So, the same river that the other two police officers saw something on. It was spotted by police officer PC Gale Emptage, who was on a late night burglary patrol. She was cycling along the river near Raid Mead Road when she saw a creature she thought was a large, shaggy dog or a wolf. She said, "It was so big that my first thought was that it must be a St. Bernard. As it loped across the road, it was only 20 feet ahead of me. It was clearly illuminated by the streetlight, and I could see it, and it had the appearance of a huge wolf. There was no doubt in my mind it was solid and real, but it wasn't a dog." She said the beast had an air of arrogance and almost a human intelligence. I would love to speak to these police officers and see if I could find out any more. Just north of that area, in Woburn Green, is a case you've heard me share many times, where a young girl lost a purse in my family area. I found it, took it back to her, and we had a conversation about what she'd seen when she was 15, crossing a golf course. And she saw what she thought at first was a large black cat, but it was upright on two legs. And she said, as it approached her, it was ill and sickly. And she actually wrote it down in a diary. She was about 15 at the time. And when she was a little girl, her dad used to have to come in the room at night because she said what they told her was an imaginary wolf would be sat at the bottom of the bed. And until her dad put a chain and lead on it and took it out, she couldn't go to sleep. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And you could this is just between Old Windsor and Bourne End, which is nothing, about 10-15 minute drive. And you've got 4 police officers who've reported something canine, and then you've got this young lass. Awesome area, lots of cover, really ideal. And once again, the golf course comes into play. Now, one haunted bypass that is quite famous here in the UK is at the Stocks Bridge bypass. Now, not just police officers have been affected by what's gone on there, also the workers and the security guards. And it has a bit of a personal attachment for me because my mum and dad actually had a ghost encounter on that road. And my mum is absolutely convinced that a voice that came from the backseat of the car saved their lives. As they swerved to avoid a sailor, she said he looked like a typical 1940s sailor, bell-bottom pants, the whole 9 yards. And she thinks that he saved them that day. Let me tell you a little bit about the Stocksbridge bypass. In 1998, a new road was built across the Peak District to help connect the M1 with the Woodhead Pass and the A1616. Once the building work started, reports of unusual occurrences began to surface, and the road soon became really famous for its paranormal activity. During the time the road was under construction, it was reported that 2 security guards witnessed young children, Victorian dress, playing in the middle of the construction site. As they got closer, the children began to disappear, and no footprint evidence was left in the trail behind them, and they were dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Over the years, some motorists have even claimed to have ghostly apparitions appear in the car next to them while they're driving on the killer road. So named because it is an accident black spot with a high number of fatalities. The ghostly sightings on the killer road have been sending shivers down the spines of drivers for 3 decades or more now. And the terrifying stretch between the Peak Districts and Sheffield has been named the second most haunted road in the UK. Almost immediately after construction began, workers complained of eerie sights and sounds that defied rational thought. They would hear the giggling voices of children, or people singing, or they'd see children playing in a field where no child should be. On a number of occasions, construction work had to be halted when equipment inexplicably cease to operate properly. Sometimes it would not even operate at all, and they would find broken equipment. And that wasn't the only thing that caused the construction to slow down. Workers were so scared they walked off the job, never to return. Regardless of what time of day it was, the ghosts of the construction site were always busy. Nevertheless, one night in particular turned up the horror, and two unsuspecting security guards were treated to an experience they would never forget. On a late night in 1987, the two security guards were patrolling the construction site when they caught a glimpse of something out of the ordinary. They saw several children dressed in clothing from a long ago era. The children were laughing and playing in the field, where the workers reported a similar incident just a few weeks before. When the two bodyguards rushed to question the children, they simply vanished, leaving the guards in stunned silence. They checked the area for any signs of the children, but were unable to find even so much as a footprint. And they stood in the field, mystified by what they were experiencing. They became intensely aware that they were being watched, and looking towards the new construction, a terrifying sight met their eyes. Standing silently on the bridge, looking down at them, was the shadowy figure of a large man in a black robe and hood. His probing, malevolent eyes seemingly staring directly into their souls, causing a visceral feeling of fear. When the guards regained their senses, they jumped into the car and drove to the bridge, never taking their eyes off the strange man. He never moved, and he was there when the guards pulled in behind him, and their fear returned when they realised that the torchlights passed through his heavy black clothes. The hooded figure vanished, and the guards fled in terror. When they returned to the office, they were met by their supervisor, who could tell that the two guards were shaken to the core. Upon hearing the story that sounded like something out of a spine-chilling horror film, he called the police. Two police officers were dispatched to the worksite to look into this bizarre matter. They had no doubt the guards had seen something. They thought it was ghosts and decided it was absurd. The scepticism would soon come crashing down around them. Driving out to the site, the two police officers turned the car off, sat in the dark in silence, hoping at least to see something, and they were not disappointed. After a couple of hours, one of the officers broke the silence with a blood-curdling scream. His partner snapped his head around to see the torso of a man pressed against the window, and the other officer jumped out of the car to apprehend what he thought was some kind of joker. But when he came around the front of the car, the figure had completely vanished. The two officers were suddenly overcome with an intense feeling of dread, and frightening sounds filled the once quiet night. Convinced something strange was going on, they returned to the precinct and filed their report. In it, they detailed how, on their way back, they could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy fists banging on the rear of the car. The night of terror had come to an end. Since that night in 1987, construction of the bypass has come to an end, but the horrors continue. Several eyewitnesses have come forward with similar reports of ghostly activity along the bypass. Travellers have reported seeing the spectral children playing in the field, as well as the phantom monk walking along the road, his head bowed in a silent prayer. One couple, in 1997, feared they ran a pedestrian over when he suddenly appeared in front of their car. When they got out to investigate, they found nothing. No injured person was anywhere to be found. Statistically, Stocksbridge Bypass has the worst record of car accidents in the whole of the UK. While reporting accidents, drivers stated that someone suddenly appeared before their cars, causing them to lose control. And when you think about it, all that activity is contained in that 5 mile radius of the new bypass. Was something disturbed when the bypass was being made? I mean, to me, that is the most obvious answer. where we see cowled monks or dark figures or children who are pretending to be Victorian in some way, is usually a dark, brooding energy. Back in the day, we would have called it the Fae, a negative Fae, that would draw people there to terrify them and feed on that fear. But let's get back to cryptid creatures and police officers, because when you think about it, they're out on the lonely roads at night. Where I live, there's probably 1 or 2 police officers on, and the further you get out into the countryside, it might take them probably 20 minutes, half an hour to get to you if you saw something. So if there is things out there that are lurking about on the roadside, we really should be taking these experiences to heart. These are police officers, serving officers, who are bound to be truthful in their duty. So when they see an animal that they can't describe, we really need to take note of that. I spoke to 2 officers in the Yorkshire area who were driving one of the A roads at night, and they had actually had to go out because a number of people had made reports at their station that they'd seen an upright wolf running across the road. These 2 went out and were laughing about it, thought it was going to be a dead easy job, until it came down the embankment and crossed the road in front of their car. And they both said that it knew that they were there, but it had no interest in them whatsoever. Police officers also met reports of paranormal and UFO activity. Now, 2 police officers made a report of seeing a floating man. These next reports come from the Spooky Isles website. It's one of my favourite websites, so I must give credit to them, and you'll find a link to them in the description below of this video. They said, the magnificent wrought iron gates to Mary Stevens Park in Stourbridge lead out directly onto the Worcester Street Island. And it was here that 2 policemen in a panda car on an early morning shift were confronted by a bizarre sight. They spotted an old gentleman heading off towards Heath Street, but instead of walking, he appeared to be floating just above the road. They followed him into Heath Street and watched him float down the left-hand side of the road. His legs were obscured by parked cars, but the figure was unmistakably floating along rather than walking. He got to about halfway along the street, and then he simply disappeared. Despite a thorough search of the area, the police officers could find no trace of the strange floating gentleman. It's a strange one, isn't it? I've heard a report of Roman soldiers that were seen, and they were floating above the floor where they were seen. But there are lots of accounts like that on the Spooky Isle website. It's one of the reasons I like it. This one here, let me just share this one with you. Following a report of an intruder in one of the buildings, a panda car was dispatched late one night to Merrydale Cemetery in Wolverhampton to investigate. The key holder had already been contacted, and the police officer sat in his car to wait. It was raining heavily at the time, and after a few minutes, an old lady appeared along the street to let him in. They entered the building together, and after a check round, it was clear everything was secure. They came out, and the old lady looked up and went on her way. The policeman spent a few minutes in his car, writing up the incident, and was suddenly disturbed by a tap on the window. The man standing there said he was a key holder and had come to open up. The officer explained he had already been in and checked, but the man was adamant that he was the only one who had a key. When entering the building again, it was obvious there was just one set of wet footprints on the floor. However, the officer's description of the old lady did turn out to match that of a key holder, except she died many years before. 2 policemen on panda car duty in Staffordshire decided to take an impromptu rest break early one morning around 3 or 4 o'clock. They parked up behind the Penn United Reformed Church, but were soon disturbed by the distinct sound of a lady in high heels clip-clopping as she walked quickly towards their car. They couldn't see anyone, but they could still clearly hear her heels clicking as she walked straight past the driver's door. At this, the unnerved officers drove off rather quickly and headed straight back to the police station. They went back to the station and told the sergeant about what had happened, and he realised that many years ago there had been a murder there, and a woman was found and she was wearing very high heels when they found her. I think the creepiest case for me that involves the police is the Brother Glen Poltergeist, and people who know that case will understand. Over a 2-day period, a mother and her teenage son had a lot of paranormal activity at their property. They phoned their local police force, who thought that it was some kind of mental illness, and they went in, ever so sympathetic, until they saw with their own eyes the activity. Clothes would just suddenly come off a washing pile and fly across the room. The family's small dog was said to be found levitating, and it was also found 7 feet up on the top of a bush, and it was only a tiny little chihuahua. There was, however, a teenage boy living at the property, and the mother and the boy were regular churchgoers, so the police got the church involved in that. But the police force in Glasgow literally said that they admitted that they did not know what was going on. They weren't looking for anything criminal. It wasn't something that was hoaxed, as they seen the activity with their own eyes. And several police officers had been there when the lights had flashed on and off, lampshades had turned themselves upside down, and there was banging and all kind of activity going on. And it died down after they contacted the church. Now, in this situation, I have to say, I think this is connected to the boy. Because when our energy changes, the energy you have as a small toddler is not the same energy you have as a 13 or 14-year-old. It's a very confusing period, lots of things going on around. Not really sure family background, but the boy could just be going through something. And at that age, we don't know how to act on that energy because we haven't been taught. It's been suppressed, by society. And weird, strange things will happen. It happened with my own girls, and it will happen with some of your children out there, or to yourselves when you were teenagers. Tonight, we've spoken about police officers and the things that they've gone through, and keeping those stories for, later years, for times when we will need to pass them down to other people. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on Tom. So as I say, Tom's gone into hospital this week, and he's really keen to write down his encounters, but it's very tiring for him. So what I've done is I've spoken to him twice, and I've taped what he had to say, and I'm writing that down in a document for him. And when he's recuperating at home, he can have that document and he can edit it, add, delete, or any information that he suddenly remembers. So when he's ready and he's got it all together and he's feeling a bit better, I'll bring you part 2 of Tom's story. Now, off the back of Tom's story, we had the first account that we heard tonight, and that's from the serving police officer. And I wanted to tell you that there's a new case that's coming from Bempton. I'm going to be speaking to the witness there, probably someday over the weekend or early next week. I think he may have seen a similar creature to what Sarah and Emma saw out there. And then we've got a case involving Rosie and Fred West, so keep your eye out for that one. There's a brand new report coming email, the red-eyed pig monster. And there are many, many more like that. So make sure you check us out every Saturday at 8 p.m. on YouTube, or on a Friday on a podcast of your choice. So please check out my YouTube memberships and patrons, and you'll get early exclusive reports on there. Or like, share, or comment on this video to really help out the channel. I put content like this out every week in, week out, and I'm sure there's something to suit. And it's been absolutely wonderful spending time with you all tonight. And I will be back at the same time, same day, next week. Good night, everyone.